Zethkar felt the deck shake under his feet as another blast hit the star's edge. The Viridian warship was dying. He could smell the burning metal and hear the screams of his crew through the smoke. 6 months of war against the Shadowkin had brought him to this moment. His proud ship was breaking apart around him. "Sir, hull breach on deck 7!" shouted his weapons officer. The young Viridian's voice cracked with fear. Zethkar had seen fear before, but never like this. The Shadowkin ships moved like ghosts through space. Their black hulls seemed to drink light. Their weapons cut through Viridian armor like it was paper. Another explosion rocked the ship. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Zethkar grabbed the command rail to keep from falling. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, but he could see it in their eyes. They knew they were beaten. "Engineering reports main drive is offline," called his first officer. "We're dead in space, sir." Zethkar looked at the tactical display. 3 Shadowkin destroyers circled his ship like predators. They were taking their time, playing with their prey. It was how the Shadowkin fought. They liked to watch. Their enemies suffer before the final blow. The communication system crackled to life. A voice spoke in perfect Viridian. "Surrender now, and your crew will be processed quickly. Resist, and we will make your deaths last for days." Zethkar's hand moved to his sidearm. Better to die fighting than give the Shadowkin what they wanted. He was a warrior of the Viridian Empire. His people had ruled this sector for 1,000 years. They did not surrender, but before he could draw his weapon, something new appeared on the display. A ship dropped out of hyperspace between the stars, Edge and the Shadowkin vessels. It was smaller than his dreadnought, but moved with purpose. The ship's hull was gray and blocky. Human design. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Liberty's Dawn. You boys picked the wrong fight today." The human ship opened fire. Immediately. No warning. No demands for surrender. Just action. Zethkar watched in amazement as the human weapons tore into the nearest Shadowkin destroyer. The alien ship's shields flared and died. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull. The other 2 Shadowkin ships turned to face this new threat. Their weapons fired in perfect coordination. The human ship rolled and twisted between the beams. It moved like a living thing, like it was dancing with death. "Star's Edge, this is Liberty's Dawn. We're going to get you out of here. Prepare for emergency evacuation." Zethkar felt a moment of pride surge through him. No Viridian ship had ever needed rescue. His people were the strongest warriors in the galaxy. But as another explosion shook his dying vessel, pride seemed less important than survival. "All hands, abandon ship," he ordered. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Escape pods launched from the stars. Edge as the human ship fought a running battle with the Shadowkin vessels. Zethkar was the last to leave his bridge. It was tradition. A captain stayed with his ship until the end. His escape pod was picked up by the Liberty's Dawn's shuttle bay. As the pod's door opened, Zethkar got his first close look at humans in their natural environment. The shuttle bay was organized chaos. Humans ran everywhere, helping Viridian survivors. They moved with purpose, but without the rigid discipline he was used to. A human female approached him. She was small by Viridian standards, barely reaching his chest. Her uniform identified her as a medical officer. "Sir, I'm Amy Torres. Are you injured?" Zethkar shook his head. The medic nodded and moved on to help a wounded Viridian engineer. She worked quickly and efficiently, but what struck Zethkar was how gentle she was. Viridian medics were skilled, but cold. This human actually seemed to care about her patients. "You must be the Viridian captain." The voice belonged to a human male. He was tall for his species and carried himself like a soldier. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. Welcome aboard the Liberty's Dawn." Zethkar studied the human captain. Morrison was older than he looked. Gray touched his temples. His eyes were hard, but not unkind. This was a warrior who had seen many battles. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Viridian Imperial Navy," he replied, formally. "I owe you a debt of honor." Morrison smiled. "No debt. We're all fighting the same enemy. The question is, what do we do now? Your ship is gone. My superiors will want a full report on what happened out there." "The Shadowkin have a new weapon," Zethkar said, "something that can track our ships through hyperspace. They were waiting for us." Morrison's expression darkened. "That's what I was afraid of. This war just got a lot harder." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Commander, I have a proposition for you. Stay aboard my ship as a tactical advisor. We could use your expertise." Zethkar felt surprise. Humans were known to be inclusive, but this was unprecedented. No alien had ever served aboard a human warship. "Why would you trust me with your ship's secrets?" "Because you fought the Shadowkin longer than we have. Because your people know things about warfare that we're still learning. And because we need all the help we can get." Morrison extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. "What do you say?" Zethkar looked around the shuttle bay. The humans continued their work, saving his people without question or hesitation. They had risked their ship to rescue strangers. It was not how the Viridian military operated. His people saved their own first, but these humans had saved his crew when his own fleet had abandoned them. Perhaps there was something to learn from these strange aliens. He grasped Morrison's hand. "I accept your offer, Captain." Morrison grinned. "Excellent. Let me show you to your quarters. Then we'll get you briefed on our operations. Fair warning, though, we do things a little differently than you're probably used to." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Zethkar observed the human crew. They moved with less formality than Viridian soldiers. Officers and enlisted personnel talked freely. Some even joked with each other. It seemed unprofessional, but these same undisciplined humans had just defeated 3 Shadowkin ships and saved his crew. Perhaps their methods deserved closer study. His war was far from over, but now he would fight it alongside humanity, for better or worse. 3 weeks aboard the Liberty's Dawn had taught Zethkar many things about humans. They were loud. They argued constantly. Their command structure seemed to change depending on the situation. It was nothing like the ordered ranks of the Viridian military. But they were also effective in ways that puzzled him. When the ship's navigation computer failed, Pete Collins had fixed it using parts from a broken coffee maker. When the weapons array overloaded, Carlos Rivera had jury-rigged a solution, using spare medical equipment. The humans seemed to view every problem as just another puzzle to solve. Now they were heading to Kepler 442b, a mining colony under Shadowkin blockade. 50,000 civilians were trapped on the planet's surface. The Galactic Defense Coalition had written them off as casualties of war, but Captain Morrison had volunteered his ship for a rescue mission. "It's suicide," Zethkar had told him during the mission briefing. "The Shadowkin have 12 ships in that system. We have 4. Morrison had just shrugged. "Then we'll have to be smarter than they are." Standing on the bridge now, watching the main display, Zethkar wondered if human confidence was actually just human foolishness. The Shadowkin fleet surrounded Kepler 442b like a spider's web. Their ships moved in perfect formation, every angle covered, every escape route blocked. "Contact established with the colony," reported Maria Santos from the communications station. "They're reading us. 53,000 civilians confirmed on the surface." "Any word from the other rescue ships?" Morrison asked. "The Centauri Freedom is reporting engine problems. The New Tokyo is 30 minutes behind schedule. The Braveheart is ready for action." Zethkar frowned. In Viridian military doctrine, the fleet would wait for all ships to arrive before beginning the assault. Coordinated. Attack. Maximum firepower. But Morrison was already giving orders. "Pete, take us into the asteroid field. Lisa, coordinate with the Braveheart. I want them to come in from the opposite side. First Officer Lisa Grant looked up from her station. Sir, that leaves us outnumbered 6-1 on our approach. Which is exactly what they won't expect. Morrison turned to his tactical officer. Carlos, I want all weapons ready but powered down. Make us look like a wounded bird. Zethkar watched the human crew work. They moved with practiced efficiency. But unlike Viridian soldiers, they questioned orders. They offered suggestions. They adapted the plan as they went. It should have been chaos. Instead, it felt like watching a machine with 1,000 moving parts. The Liberty's Dawn entered the asteroid field. The massive rocks provided some cover but also limited their movement. On the display, Zethkar could see 3 Shadowkin, destroyers moving to intercept them. Maria, start broadcasting on all civilian frequencies, Morrison ordered. Tell them we're here for evacuation. Give them the rally points. Sir, that will tell the Shadowkin exactly what we're doing, Zethkar protested. Morrison smiled grimly. That's the idea. Pete, how long until we clear the field? 8 minutes at current speed, Captain. Too long. Take us through the needle. The bridge fell silent. Even Zethkar knew about the needle. It was a gap between 2 massive asteroids, barely wider than a destroyer. No sane pilot would attempt it during combat. Sir, Pete said quietly. The clearance is less than 50 meters on each side. I have confidence in you, Pete. The navigator's hands moved over his controls. The ship's course shifted toward the impossibly narrow gap. On the tactical display, the Shadowkin ships followed. They were gaining ground. As they approached the needle, Zethkar gripped his console. The asteroid walls rushed past the viewports. The ship shook as its shields scraped against rock. Warning alarms sounded throughout the bridge. Shadowkin ships are falling behind, Carlos reported. They're not following us through. Of course not, Morrison said. They're smart enough to go around, which gives us exactly what we need. The Liberty's Dawn burst from the asteroid field like a bullet from a gun. Ahead of them, Kepler 442b hung in space like a blue-green jewel. The planet was surrounded by Shadowkin ships, but they were all facing the wrong direction. Now, Carlos. All weapons. Full power. The human ship opened fire on the nearest Shadowkin vessel. The alien ship's shields flared and collapsed. Secondary. Explosions rippled along its hull. Before the other Shadowkin ships could react, the Liberty's Dawn was already moving to its next target. Braveheart is beginning their attack run, Lisa reported. Civilian transports are launching from the planet. Zethkar watched the battle unfold on the main display. It was unlike any naval engagement he had ever seen. The humans didn't try to match the Shadowkin ship for ship. Instead, they used speed and surprise. They hit hard and moved fast. When the enemy adapted, they changed tactics again. A Shadowkin heavy cruiser turned to engage them. Its weapons were twice as powerful as anything the Liberty's Dawn carried. In a straight fight, the human ship would be destroyed in minutes. But Morrison didn't fight straight. Pete, put us in the planet's atmosphere. Use the gravity well to slingshot us around. Sir, we're not designed for atmospheric flight. We're not designed for a lot of things. Do it anyway. The Liberty's Dawn dove toward the planet. The hull groaned as it hit the upper atmosphere. The ship bucked and rolled like a wild animal. But Pete held their course steady. The Shadowkin cruiser followed them down. Its larger mass made it less maneuverable in the planet's gravity. As they rounded the planet's curve, the human ship suddenly reversed course. The maneuver caught the Shadowkin captain completely off guard. Fire everything, Morrison ordered. The Liberty's Dawn's weapons struck the enemy cruiser at point blank. Range! The alien ship's engines exploded in a brilliant flash. It tumbled away, dead in space. Transport ships are clear of the planet, Maria announced. All civilians are aboard and moving to hyperspace jump points. Time to go, Morrison said. Pete, get us out of here. But as they turned away from the planet, more Shadowkin ships appeared. The remainder of the blockade fleet had finally repositioned. 6 ships moved to block their escape route. Sir, we can't break through that line, Carlos said. Too much firepower. Zethkar expected Morrison to order a retreat. It was the logical choice. The mission was complete. The civilians were safe. There was no point in sacrificing the ship. But the human captain was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Lisa, what's the status on those mining charges the colonists left behind? Still active, sir. The planet's mining guild didn't have time to deactivate them before evacuation. Perfect. Maria, get me a channel to the mining computer. Sir? The communications officer looked confused. If we can't go through them, we'll go around them. Pete, take us back to the planet. Low orbit. The Liberty's Dawn dove toward Kepler 442b again. This time, Morrison wasn't planning to use the gravity well. He was planning something much more dangerous. Carlos, lock weapons on the primary mining site. Maria, transmit the detonation codes. On my mark. Zethkar suddenly understood. The mining charges were designed to break apart asteroids for easier harvesting. If detonated all at once on the planet's surface, they would create a massive debris field. The Shadowkin ships would have to scatter or be destroyed by flying rock. Mark, Morrison said. The planet's surface erupted in a chain of explosions. Massive chunks of rock and metal flew into space like shrapnel from a giant grenade. The Shadowkin. Ships scrambled to avoid the debris. In the confusion, the Liberty's Dawn slipped through their lines and jumped to hyperspace. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Zethkar found himself looking at Captain Morrison with new respect. The human had saved 50,000 lives using nothing but creativity and audacity. No Viridian commander would have attempted such a reckless plan. But it had worked. Against all odds, it had worked. Not bad for a day's work, Morrison said, settling back in his command chair. Maria, send word to command. Mission successful. Zethkar realized he was beginning to understand why the Shadowkin feared humanity. It wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their refusal to accept defeat. They turned every disadvantage into an opportunity, every impossible situation into a challenge to overcome. Perhaps there was more to learn from these strange aliens than he had thought. The retreat through the Cygnus Nebula was supposed to be routine. 12 ships of the Coalition fleet were falling back to regroup after the failed assault on the Shadowkin stronghold at Vega Prime. The nebula's dense gases would hide them from enemy sensors while they planned their next move. Zethkar stood beside Captain Morrison on the bridge of the Liberty's Dawn, watching the swirling clouds of purple and gold gas stream past the viewports. The nebula was beautiful but dangerous. Its electromagnetic storms could disable ship systems without warning. Fleet reports all ships accounted for, Lisa Grant announced from her station. The Endeavor is having engine problems, but they're keeping up. Morrison nodded. Tell them to stay close. I don't like this place. Zethkar understood the captain's concern. The nebula was like flying through a storm cloud the size of a star system. Visibility was limited to a few thousand kilometers. Sensors were useless. If the Shadowkin found them here, there would be nowhere to run. Sir, Pete Collins called from navigation. I'm reading gravitational anomalies ahead. Something's interfering with our course. Define interference, Morrison said. It's like something is pulling us off course. A gravity well, but it's not showing up on sensors. Before Morrison could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. The ship shuddered as something massive struck their shields. Contact! Contact! Carlos Rivera shouted from Tactical. Multiple Shadowkin vessels bearing 27 Mark IV. They're coming out of the nebula wall. The main display showed the nightmare that had been waiting for them. 8 Shadowkin ships materialized from the gas clouds like ghosts. They had been hiding in the nebula's electromagnetic interference, waiting for the Coalition fleet to walk into their trap. How did they know our route? Morrison demanded. They must have a new type of sensor, Zethkar replied, studying the tactical display. Something that can track ships through the nebula's interference. The Shadowkin ships opened. Fire immediately. Their weapons cut through the nebula's gas, creating brilliant streaks of energy. The Coalition fleet scattered, but there was nowhere to go. The gravity well that Pete had detected was pulling them deeper into the nebula. They were trapped. All ships, this is Morrison. Form up on the Liberty's dawn. We're going to punch through. Their line. Sir, Lisa said, we're outnumbered almost 2-1, and that gravity well is getting stronger. Morrison's jaw was set in determination. Then we better move fast. Carlos, target the lead Shadowkin ship. Full spread of torpedoes. The Liberty's Dawn opened fire along with the rest of the Coalition fleet. The space between the two forces lit up with weapons fire. But the Shadowkin were ready for them. Their shields held against the first barrage. Return fire hammered the Coalition ships. The frigate New Soul took a direct hit to its engine section and exploded in a ball of plasma. The destroyer Courage lost its forward weapons array and began to drift. We're losing ships, Lisa reported. The gravity well is pulling us deeper into the nebula. If we don't break free soon, we'll be crushed. Zethkar watched the battle with growing dread. In Viridian military doctrine, this was the moment when commanders would consider surrender. The tactical situation was hopeless. The enemy had superior numbers and position. Continuing to fight would only result in more casualties. But as he looked around the bridge, he saw no sign of surrender in the human crew. Their faces were grim but determined. They worked their stations with focused intensity, looking for any advantage they could find. "Ma'am," called out Ensign Kevin Murphy from the science station. He was young, barely out of the academy. "I'm reading something strange about that gravity well. It's not natural." Dr. Helen Beck, the ship's science officer, moved to his station. "Show me." Murphy's hands flew over his controls. "The gravitational distortion is coming from the nebula's gas composition. The Shadowkin must have seeded it with heavy particles. If we could destabilize the mixture..." Beck's eyes lit up with understanding. "The gases would expand rapidly, create a massive explosion." "How massive?" Morrison asked. "Big enough to take out everything in a 50-kilometer radius," Beck replied, "including us." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of weapons fire and damage reports. Morrison stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through the possibilities. "What would it take to trigger the explosion?" he asked finally. "A concentrated energy burst at the center of the gravity well," Beck said. "We'd have to get close, enough to detonate our own reactor core." "A suicide mission," Lisa said quietly. "Not necessarily," Beck continued. "If we evacuated non-essential personnel first, a skeleton crew could fly the ship in and trigger the blast, then escape in the remaining shuttles." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Zethkar could see the weight of command in the captain's eyes. He was considering sacrificing his ship and possibly his life to save the rest of the fleet. "Sir," Chief, Engineer Ryan Cole's voice came over the intercom. "I couldn't help but overhear. If you're thinking about manually detonating the reactor, I volunteer for the job." "Ryan, that's a one-way trip," Morrison replied. "Maybe not. I've been working on modifications to the emergency containment system. If I can trigger a controlled overload instead of a complete meltdown, there might be time to get clear." Zethkar felt a chill run down his spine. The human was volunteering to die for people he barely knew. It was beyond his understanding. Viridian. Warriors fought bravely, but they fought for honor and glory. This was something different, something that frightened him. "I'll need a volunteer crew," Cole continued. "Can't do it alone." Before Morrison could respond, voices began coming over. The intercom. "Engineering Specialist Torres volunteers, sir. Reactor Technician Brown reporting for duty. Navigation Officer Phillips ready to assist." Within minutes, half the ship's engineering staff had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. Zethkar stared at the humans around him in amazement. They weren't just willing to die for their shipmates, they were eager to do it. "All right," Morrison said finally. "Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel. Ryan, you have 30 minutes to prepare your modifications." As the crew began preparing for the mission, Zethkar found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare. The Viridian Empire prided itself on military efficiency. Soldiers followed orders without question. Personal feelings were irrelevant, but these humans fought with something more than discipline. They fought with passion, with love for their fellow crew members. It made them stronger than any military training could achieve. "Sir," Amy Torres approached Morrison. "Request permission to stay aboard with the skeleton crew." "Denied. We'll need you to treat the wounded on the evacuation ships. With respect, sir, you'll need a medic on the mission, too. If someone gets hurt during the reactor modifications, you'll need immediate medical care." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in the young medic's eyes. "Permission granted, but you stay with the evacuation team until the last possible moment." Torres nodded and moved away to help with the preparations. Zethkar followed her with his eyes. She was barely older than Ensign Murphy, but she was ready to die alongside the veteran engineers. "Commander," Morrison said, turning to Zethkar, "I need you to coordinate with the other ships in the fleet. When we trigger the explosion, they'll have a brief window to escape the gravity well." Zethkar nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the young humans preparing to sacrifice themselves, about the casual way they had volunteered for death, about the trust they showed in each other. In Viridian culture, such behavior would be seen as wasteful, emotional, inefficient. But as he watched the Liberty's Dawn's crew prepare for their desperate gambit, Zethkar began to understand something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans weren't just fighting to win the war, they were fighting to preserve something precious, something worth dying for. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever seen, because an enemy that fights for honor might retreat when the battle turns against them. An enemy that fights for conquest might negotiate when victory becomes impossible. But an enemy that fights for love will never stop, never surrender, never accept defeat. The Shadowkin had made a terrible mistake when they chose to fight humanity. They had awakened something that could not be reasoned with or bargained with or defeated. They had awakened the human heart. The explosion in the Cygnus Nebula had worked beyond their wildest hopes. The chain reaction destroyed 6 Shadowkin ships and scattered the rest. But the Liberty's Dawn paid a heavy price for victory. Half the crew was dead or dying. Captain Morrison lay unconscious in the medical bay, his body ravaged by radiation from the reactor overload. The ship's systems were failing one by one. They were stranded in deep space, far from any friendly port. Zethkar stood in the ship's corridor, looking through the window into the medical bay. Bodies covered in white sheets lined the walls. The wounded lay on every available surface. The air smelled of blood and burned electronics. Dr. Beck worked frantically over the injured, but there were too many patients and not enough supplies. Amy Torres had been working for 18 hours straight without rest. Her hands shook with exhaustion, but she kept moving from patient to patient. "We need to evacuate the critically wounded," Beck told First Officer Lisa Grant. "If we can get them to a medical facility—" "With what?" Grant's voice was raw with fatigue and grief. "Our shuttles are destroyed. Main engines are offline. We can't even send a distress signal through this interference." Zethkar had never seen humans look so defeated. Their usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of soldiers who had pushed beyond their limits. In Viridian military culture, this was when commanders made hard choices. Save who you could, leave the rest behind, but Grant wasn't making those choices. Neither was Beck or any of the other senior staff. They continued to treat patients who had no chance of survival. They used precious medical supplies on wounds that couldn't be healed. Lisa, Chief Engineer Ryan Cole, limped into the medical bay. His left leg was badly burned from the reactor explosion. "I've got partial power restored to decks 3 and 4. We can move some of the wounded to more comfortable quarters." "What about the main drive?" Grant asked. "Dead. The explosion fried every major system. We're running on backup power and prayer." Zethkar stepped forward. "Commander Grant, I request permission to speak privately." Grant nodded and followed him into the corridor. Away from the wounded, Zethkar chose his words carefully. "Your situation is hopeless," he said bluntly. "You have limited supplies, no propulsion, and enemies searching for you. In Viridian military doctrine, this is when we would perform triage. Save those who can be saved. Allow the rest to die with honor." Grant's eyes flashed with anger. "That's not how we do things." "I understand your feelings, but logic must prevail. You have 20 crew members who could survive if you focus your resources on them. Or you can watch everyone die trying to save people who are already beyond help." "Logic?" Grant stepped closer to him. "You want to talk about logic? Let me tell you something about human logic, Commander. We don't leave our people behind. Ever. Even when it means everyone dies. Especially then." Zethkar stared at her in amazement. "That makes no sense. How can your species have survived this long with such inefficient thinking?" Grant smiled grimly. "Because we don't think like that when it matters. Watch and learn." She walked back into the medical bay and began organizing the crew. Not to abandon the wounded, but to care for them better. She had engineering teams convert storage rooms into additional medical facilities. She ordered the galley staff to prepare nutritious meals for the patients who could eat. "Ma'am, Ensign," Murphy approached her hesitantly. "The Shadowkin are jamming our communications, but I might be able to boost the signal if we reroute power from life support." "Absolutely not," Grant replied. "We're not sacrificing environmental systems to send a message that might not even get through. But ma'am, if we could call for help..." "Kevin, we have 43 people alive on this ship. We're going to keep all 43 alive until help arrives. End of discussion." Zethkar watched in fascination as the human crew refused to accept their situation. They worked around every obstacle. When the water recycling system failed, they collected moisture from the air vents. When the food replicators broke down, they rationed emergency supplies and stretched them as far as possible. Most incredibly, they maintained morale. Crew members told jokes to the wounded. They shared stories of home. They sang songs that Zethkar didn't understand, but that seemed to give the humans strength. "Why do you do this?" he asked Amy Torres as she changed the bandages on a burn victim who would clearly not survive another day. "Do what?" she replied, not looking up from her work. "Care for patients who cannot be saved. Waste resources on the hopeless cases." Torres paused in her work and looked at him directly. "Because he's not a hopeless case. He's Jamie Rodriguez from Denver, Colorado. He has a wife named Susan and twin daughters who just started walking. He fixes the ship's communications array and makes the best coffee in the fleet. But he's going. To die. Maybe. But not alone. Not forgotten. And not without everything we can do to help him." Zethkar felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he couldn't identify. The human's words made no military sense, but they touched something deep inside him. Later that day, the Shadowkin found them. 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace nearby. Not a large force, but more than enough to finish off the crippled Liberties, Dawn. They approached slowly, like predators stalking wounded prey. "All hands to battle stations," Grant announced over the intercom. The response was immediate, but heartbreaking. Engineers with broken ribs hauled themselves to their posts. Navigation. Officers with burned hands worked their controls. Even some of the walking wounded left the medical bay to help with ship operations. "Ma'am," Carlos Rivera reported from the weapons station. "We have maybe 10% power to the main guns. Shields are completely offline." "Then we'll make those. Shots count," Grant replied. Zethkar couldn't believe what he was seeing. The humans were preparing to fight a hopeless battle with a ship that was barely functional. By all rights, they should have surrendered hours ago. "Commander Grant," he said, "this is madness. Your ship cannot fight. Your crew is dying. Why not?" "Surrender?" Perhaps the Shadowkin will show mercy. Grant looked at him with something like pity in her eyes. Commander, you still don't understand. We're not fighting because we think we can win. We're fighting because that's who we are. First Shadowkin ship opened fire. Its weapons struck the Liberty's Dawn's hull and tore through several decks. More crew members died in that single salvo. But the humans fought back. Their damaged weapons returned fire, scoring hits on the enemy ship's shields. It wasn't much, but it was defiance in the face of certain death. Direct hit on Deck 7, Murphy reported. Medical bay is taking damage. All patients to the emergency shelter on Deck 5, Grant ordered. Ma'am, we need those crew members to fight the ship. We'll manage. Get our people to safety. Zethkar watched as humans who should have been defending their stations instead carried wounded comrades to shelter. They were choosing to protect the helpless instead of fighting for their own lives. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen. The second Shadowkin ship joined the attack. The Liberty's Dawn shuddered under the combined firepower. Hull breaches appeared on multiple decks. The life support system began to fail, but the humans kept fighting. Ryan Cole worked to restore power while his burns reopened and bled. Amy Torres treated wounded crew members while enemy fire exploded around her. Lisa Grant commanded the battle while knowing she was leading her people to their deaths. And through it all, they never stopped caring for each other. They shared oxygen masks with the wounded. They helped injured comrades to their posts. They faced death together as a family. Zethkar finally understood what made humans so dangerous. It wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their refusal to let each other die alone. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for their comrades. No enemy could defeat that. No weapon could destroy it. The humans had found something worth more than victory. They had found something worth dying for. The final battle took place in the engine room of the Liberty's Dawn. The Shadowkin boarding parties had cut through the ship's defenses deck by deck. Now only a handful of humans remained alive, gathered around their unconscious captain in the ship's heart. Zethkar crouched behind an overturned console, firing his weapon at the advancing Shadowkin soldiers. Beside him, Ryan Cole worked frantically at a damaged control panel. The chief engineer's burns had reopened and blood stained his uniform, but his hands never stopped moving. "How much longer?" Lisa Grant shouted over the sound of weapons fire. 2 minutes, Cole replied. Maybe 3 if they don't hit the main coupling. Amy Torres knelt beside Captain Morrison's unconscious form, checking his vital signs. The captain had been moved here when the medical bay was destroyed. He lay on a makeshift stretcher, surrounded by the last defenders of his ship. His condition is stable, Torres reported. But if we don't get him to a real medical facility soon... A Shadowkin plasma blast struck the wall above her head, showering them with sparks and debris. Ensign Murphy returned fire from behind the reactor housing, his young face set with determination. "Contact left flank," he called out. 3 more coming through the breach. Zethkar had fought many battles in his long career. He had seen courage and cowardice, victory and defeat. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans were down to their last ammunition. Their ship was dying around them. Their captain was unconscious and possibly dying, and they were still fighting, not for victory. There was no chance of that now, not for glory or honor or any of the things that motivated Viridian warriors. They fought because their captain needed them, because their wounded shipmates depended on them, because surrendering was simply not in their nature. "Ryan, talk to me," Grant called out. "Almost there," Cole replied. "The emergency beacon is responding, but I need to boost the signal strength. The Shadowkin jamming is too strong." More enemy soldiers poured through the breach in the engine room wall. Their black armor gleamed in the red emergency lighting. Their weapons fired in perfect coordination. They advanced like machines, showing no emotion, no fear. But the humans fought like something else entirely. They fought like beings possessed. When Murphy's weapon ran out of ammunition, he grabbed a piece of broken metal and charged the nearest Shadowkin soldier. When Torres ran out of medical supplies, she used her own clothing to bandage wounds. "Got it," Cole suddenly announced. "Emergency beacon is active. If anyone's listening..." A Shadowkin energy blast struck him in the chest. The chief engineer spun around and collapsed against his control panel. Blood spread across his uniform as his hands clutched at the wound. "Ryan!" Torres immediately moved to help him, abandoning her position behind cover. Zethkar watched in amazement as the medic exposed herself to enemy fire to reach the wounded engineer. It was tactically insane. She should have stayed in cover. But Torres didn't think like a soldier. She thought like a healer. The Shadowkin soldiers concentrated their fire on her position. Plasma bolts scorched the air around her as she worked, to stop Cole's bleeding. She never flinched, never hesitated. Her only concern was saving her patient. "Amy, get back here," Grant shouted. "Not without Ryan," Torres replied calmly. Two more crew members broke cover to help her. They formed a human shield around the wounded engineer, absorbing enemy fire with their own bodies. One fell immediately. The other kept fighting even as blood poured from multiple wounds. Zethkar felt something break inside his chest. These humans were dying for each other, not because they had to, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. Because the idea of letting a shipmate die alone was worse than death itself. He looked at his own weapon, then at the advancing Shadowkin soldiers. All his life he had fought for the Viridian Empire, for duty and honor and the glory of his people. But in this moment, surrounded by dying humans who refused to abandon each other, he understood something that changed him forever. There were things worth more than personal survival. Zethkar stood up from behind his cover and opened fire on the Shadowkin soldiers. Not as a Viridian warrior following orders, not as a tactical advisor doing his job, but as a member of this crew, as someone who had learned what it meant to be human. "Commander, get down!" Grant yelled. "No," Zethkar replied, advancing toward the enemy. "We protect our own." The Shadowkin soldiers turned their weapons on him. Energy blasts burned through his armor and scorched his flesh. But he kept moving forward, kept firing, kept fighting for the humans who had shown him what courage really meant. Behind him, Cole managed to stand up despite his wounds. "Signal. Boosted," he gasped. "Beacon is broadcasting on all coalition frequencies." "Good work, Chief," Grant said, though her voice was getting weaker. She had been hit twice but refused to fall back. More Shadowkin soldiers poured into the engine room. The humans were completely outnumbered now. Their ammunition was almost gone. Several of them were already down, but they didn't surrender, even. As enemy soldiers surrounded them, they formed a defensive circle around their wounded captain. Torres continued to work on Cole's injuries while plasma fire exploded around her. Murphy threw himself between the enemy and a wounded shipmate. Grant coordinated their last stand while bleeding from multiple wounds. Zethkar understood now why. No enemy survived the humans. It wasn't because humans were stronger or smarter or better equipped. It was because they refused to let their enemies win. They refused to die quietly. They refused to let evil triumph over good. The Shadowkin soldiers, closed in for the final assault, their weapons powered up for a coordinated barrage that would end the battle once and for all. And that's when the cavalry arrived. The wall of the engine room exploded inward as human boarding teams blasted through from the outside. Fresh troops, in combat armor, poured into the room, their weapons blazing. The rescue fleet had received Cole's beacon and come to save them. But what struck Zethkar most was not the rescue itself. It was the fact that the Liberty's Dawn crew, even as salvation arrived, continued to focus on their wounded. Torres didn't stop treating patients. Grant didn't stop coordinating defense. Murphy didn't stop protecting his shipmates. The rescue. Troops quickly overwhelmed the Shadowkin soldiers. Within minutes, the engine room was secure. Medical teams rushed in to treat the wounded. Engineering crews began assessing the ship's damage. Captain Morrison, one of the rescue medics, called, "Out. We need to get him to a medical ship immediately." "Take care of the others first," Torres said weakly. She had been hit during the final battle but was still conscious. "Captain's stable. These people need attention now, even facing death. The Tay. Humans put others before themselves." Later, aboard the rescue ship, Zethkar sat in the observation lounge and watched the Liberty's Dawn being towed to safety. The ship was a wreck. Half her crew was dead. Her captain was in critical condition. By any military standard, it should have been counted as a defeat, but Zethkar knew better. He had witnessed something that would haunt the Shadowkin for generations to come. He had seen the true face of human warfare. Humans didn't win because they were strong. They won because they were unbreakable. Not individually, but collectively. They carried each other through the darkness. They refused to let their enemies destroy what they valued most. Love, loyalty, the bonds that held them together. A young human officer approached him. "Commander Zethkar, I'm Lieutenant Davis from Coalition Intelligence. We'd like to debrief you on what happened." "Of course," Zethkar replied. "But first tell me, how many human ships responded to the distress call?" 47, sir. Every available vessel in 3 sectors. Zethkar nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised. The humans would always come for their own, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. "Lieutenant," he said, "in your report, make sure you include this. The Shadowkin made a fatal error when they chose to fight humanity. They thought they were fighting soldiers, but they're not fighting soldiers. They're fighting a family." He paused, thinking of Amy Torres working to save lives while under fire. Of Ryan Cole bleeding to death but still working to call for help. Of Lisa Grant commanding a hopeless battle because her crew needed her to be strong. And families, he continued, don't surrender. They don't retreat. They don't abandon their own. They fight until the last breath because that's what love demands. Davis looked confused. "Sir, I don't understand. What does love have to do with military tactics?" Zethkar smiled sadly. The young human would learn in time. They all would. Everything. "Lieutenant, it has everything to do with everything." Outside the viewport, the Liberty's Dawn drifted silently through space. Broken, but not beaten. Damaged, but not destroyed. Like the crew that served aboard her, she would be repaired. She would fight again, and her enemies would learn, as Zethkar had learned why no one survived the humans, because the humans refused to let them.